Welcome, critters. I'm Claire Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we discuss and examine Critical Role episodes, plotlines, characters, players, everything in between through the lens of sacred reading practices. So today we are talking about Campaign 1, Episode 14, I believe. Yes, Part 1. And joining me today is Petall. Who's that?
Hello.
All right, so my icebreaker question for today is, if you could switch lives with anyone for a day, who would it be?
Ooh, that's a very good question. That's not something I've ever really thought about, ever.
Yeah, my question is, like, do you switch lives? Do you switch bodies? Like, is it you, like me, Claire, living the life of, or is it like me living inside the head of?
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I would say, I think if I could switch bodies for a day with anyone, as long as I could choose the day, I think I would choose one of the Critical Role cast members so that I could choose to be on Critical Role.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that'd be so funny. Like you playing as the player, playing as the character.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. The first person that came to mind for me was Michelle Obama, just because I love the Obamas so much. And they are really just like living their best life right now. Like they just had a wedding anniversary and like they did a whole like walk on the beach and they like carved hearts into the sand with sticks. And it was just like the most precious thing. I was like, yeah, I could live with that life for a day.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do really like the idea of a critical role player. I might have to steal that answer.
Do it. Do it.
All right, well, please join us as we embark on this exciting adventure in story analysis and self-reflection in order to deepen the understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And as always, we love hearing your own insights and stories and feelings and thoughts as well. So comment, like, subscribe. And all right, let's dive in. All right, so Vox Machina, they have just recently arrived back in Oman after defeating a beholder named Kavarn in the Underdark underneath Craghammer. And after pub crawling their way back to their keep and sleeping off their hangovers, they cast Greater Restoration on Kima to restore her to flesh after being petrified. As this episode opens, they are hiding the Horn of Orcus from her for safekeeping. And they have also been summoned to speak to the sovereign Uriel to present their findings. Tiberius arrives while they are finishing their breakfast and shows off his new bag of holding. Keelan asks him where he has been, and he explains that he did a quick teleportation circle to Draconia to buy it for himself, as one does. In the stream, Orion is actually using his own messenger bag as a prop to represent the bag of holding. So there's some banter about what the bag is made of, since it kind of looks like dragon skin, which sends Tiberius off on an explanation of Draconia's Wyvern Air Force. So he also takes the opportunity to ask Scanlan about trading his Ioun Stone for Scanlan's Circlet that allows the wielder to have two concentration spells going at the same time. Matt, as Scanlan, since Sam is gone, says that he wants to think about it before deciding. After Tiberius takes another 500 gold from the group's treasury and casts prestidigitation, there we go, on himself, they head off to speak to Uriel, but they stop at Alora's tower on the way there. She was the one to initially ask them to go to Craghammer to retrieve Kima, and she is overjoyed to see them return. She hugs Vax first before making her way around the group and getting caught in an awkwardly long hug from Tiberius. She ends with Kima and welcomes her back in an enthusiastic hug. Kima apologizes for all the trouble she's caused, and the group simultaneously realizes that there might be something more between them than friendship. Kima tells her that Vox Machina helped her complete her quest, and Alora invites them inside. She updates them on diplomatic news in Oman and serves them tea while they fill her in on everything they found in the Underdark. After learning about the beholder and mind flayers, she apologizes for putting them in such dangerous circumstances and gives them a bag of 10,000 gold pieces in payment for their services. I will take that, please. Thank you. Tiberius then tells her that they have the horn of Orcus, and Allura drops her teacup in shock. Kima explains that they're still trying to figure out what to do with it, and Allura explains what she knows of it, advising that they need to pose this question in front of the Council of Taldore, which Vox Machina have become a part of, which happened pre-stream. They express their misgivings about telling more people about the horn's existence, and she argues that the council are trustworthy people, but they argue that Uriel has already been corrupted, which happened again pre-stream, and are concerned that it will easily happen again. Allura insists that they must at least discuss the horn with the council, if not present the object to them, and if they want, they can use memory-changing magics to hide all knowledge of it. Tiberius presents a plan where they put the horn in an empty bag of holding and destroy the bag to scatter its contents into a secret extra-dimensional space. But Allura corrects him and says that to do so would jettison the contents into the astral sea. There are many things there that may retrieve and use the object, so it's really not a good idea. Keyleth also expresses reluctance in altering her memories, and Allura explains that it would be magics that are very old and highly controlled. Pike says that she trusts Allura and thinks they should look into it at least. They chat a bit further about what's going on with the council since they left, and they head over to the palace to speak with Uriel. They are led to the council chambers and are presented. One of the council members, a silver dragonborn, gives Tiberius some sass, disrespect, ? While they are introduced to each of the members, and Uriel gives a letter to an attendant to deliver to Lord and Lady Briarwood before they start. Vax explains that what their task was and how it went. He says that they are now in possession of the Horn of Orcus in a safe location, and the council reacts very strongly. They confirm that the goal is to destroy the horn, and Kima suggests taking it to the Grand Chantry to seal it away from the eyes and ears of the world unless they can come up with a way to destroy it. One of the council members suggests taking it to the Lyceum in Amman for them to study, but Vex says that she thinks the power of the horn will be too great of a temptation to the scholars there. The rest of the group agrees and says that they can't risk keeping the horn in the city in case word gets out that it's there. Sovereign Uriel agrees as well, and Allura presents her idea about changing their memories as a safety measure, which makes most of the people in the room uncomfortable, but says that she needs to discuss it with her Arcanist colleagues first. She also suggests that the two followers of the Platinum Dragon, Kima and the Silver Dragonborn, accompany Vox Machina on their way to the Grand Chantry. Kima says she will send word to the other followers of Platinum Dragon and gather the necessary people and supplies to accomplish the transference. Keyleth mentions that she does not trust the object to be transported without the direct supervision of someone from Vox Machina. Uriel responds that Vox Machina too are not free from the scrutiny that comes when it comes to the evil temptation that this object poses. So how do they know that any of them are immune? But he does understand that the best bet moving forward is now to continue with Kima's communications with the Chantry. Some of the council members offer assistance in transporting the necessary helpers and supplies to shorten the time frame, and Vax confirms that Vox Machina will feel most comfortable if they are able to accompany the item to the Chantry themselves. Uriel adjourns the meeting now that they have a plan, and the council members all leave as Percy pulls Uriel to the side, asking him about the Briarwoods. He asks if they've been in town. Uriel says they were recently, and Percy asks what their business was. Uriel explains that they are interested in expanding Whitestone's trade routes to Amman. He tells Uriel to keep it quiet, but please do let him know if they come through town again, because he has old business with them. Tiberius gives Uriel a piece of enchanted parchment in case he wants to use an instant mode of communication to notify them. They leave the palace, and Kima says that she will head to the nearest Platinum Dragon temple to start preparations, while Vox Machina heads to Gilmore's Glorious Goods. Keyleth is very excited about their weekend, and Vax asks, wow, say that 10 times fast, Kima and Pike about what the gods think about all that they're trying to accomplish with the horn. Pike says that she's unsure, considering that her divine intervention failed when they were in the Underdark, which concerns Kima, who then offers the Platinum Dragon as an alternative to Sarenrae. Keyleth gets them back on track, and Vax asks Kima if she could pray to the gods for them. She says that while the Order does have access to materials and supplies, the most they can offer is a guiding warmth to turn to when feeling uncertain on their paths. Keyleth then adds that she prefers long walks in the forest whenever she's feeling disconnected. Grog then asks if her connections with the gods allow her to have relationships, to which she responds that as far as she knows, that there's not a vow of chastity. She awkwardly leaves. And Alora tells Grog to be careful to whom he asks those questions. She then tells them to enjoy this well-earned rest and teleports out. Keyleth proposes that they take a sightseeing tour and catch a nice dinner in the city tonight, reading aloud from a tourist pamphlet to them that she found in the palace. Percy finally steers the group towards Gilmore's Glorious Goods, and that's where they break for the episode. So, what do we think of this first half?
Gosh, this is a big, juicy episode with lots of things.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
Right off the bat, I know we discussed Orion at length last time that I guested on the podcast, but gosh, that whole bag of holding incident is it's just not what a good helpful player at the table does. If he wanted to do it, the best way to do it would be to say, like, hey, Matt, I'm thinking I want to get a bag of holding. How can I go about doing this? But instead, he had to be the hero who went off and saved the day and snuck off across to another continent in the middle of the night for
no anyone
without telling anyone, not even Matt, especially not Matt, that he returns with a bag of holding that he probably could have gotten elsewhere closer, but he had to just pull in his ties to Draconia again.
There's a lot of issues with Orion and Tiberius in this episode. The bag of holding is a huge one.
Yeah, that was what I was just starting off with.
Yeah. Him getting mad at Matt for the Kima Alora vibes going on. Also the Silver Dragonborn drama going on.
Yeah, he said that he would not pay any attention to her because she was a peasant.
He literally called her a wretched peasant.
Yes, that was the phrase. I remember it being like incredibly like rude and classist and all that. Yeah, there's a lot of problems with Tiberius and Orion in this, but there's also a lot of like lore interweaving. Yeah, like we get. Is this the first mention of the Briarwoods?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's obviously a big hint.
Yeah,
being dropped, which is exciting, especially to hear what is to be said about the Briarwoods, and how they came to their power in Whitestone, and also with like Percy's calm politeness. Given what we all know, it just seems like, obviously, even going into this, even when I watched this episode for the first time, when I heard that snippet, I already knew who the Briarwoods were. But I can imagine like what it must have been like to watch this firsthand and think of it just as like, oh, it's just another name thrown out there, and not know the significance, and like, oh, like this just seems like an ordinary reaction. Only to like realize that moment must have realize in retrospect that moment must have taken Percy a huge amount of restraint.
Yeah.
Especially when being told that like the Briarwoods were like honoring the memory of the Derolos, and
yeah. So this is still in the era where they show the chat in the bottom corner on the YouTube videos, and so I'm always really interested to see like what chat did when it first aired, you know. And so there was a lot of conversation I think Alora was actually the first one to drop the Briarwood name when she
Mm-hmm.
was updating Vox Machina on like what the council had been up to since they were gone. But it was very subtle. No one caught it. Even Percy didn't catch it, but
Mm-hmm.
Chat did. And so Chat was like, Briarwoods, 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 like way before the interaction with Uriel even happened. And so, like, it's just fascinating to see that it didn't even register until Matt was like, obviously, Briarwoods.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like Talison's face, like he like just went into like 404 arrow more error mode. Like he
Yeah.
just sat back and like blinked a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, such a good moment.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, well, allegories, metaphors, stories that we're seeing here.
Yeah, one thing that I was really noticing was in the way, like especially early on as they're just figuring out the world and how this is like the way that they interact and talk about like the gods. It's a
Yeah, this is
very
very
like Christianized perspective on them. Like there was even that joke about like that joke that Marisha made that Allura was trying to like invite
Kima,
Pike.
yeah, was converting,
Well,
yeah,
right. It was Kima. It's hard sometimes easy to get mixed up with Matt voicing them all. But
yeah.
like yeah, Kima trying to get Pike to like go to her church and stuff like that. And a lot of the like some of the like both like hold on a second. I had to stop for a moment to remember whether it was Vax or Vex. The name is the Vax was that like the way that Vax questioned his questions about the gods and like Keyleth's dismissal of the gods is still like
Mhm.
both of them came from like a very Christianized base, which I think is very interesting in a world where like there is no Christianity. It's a pantheon and it's like the way that the gods interact with the world are like very, very different. And often it is used as symbolism in D&D because there's so many people who have those roots and like and it's just like such like a cultural root in North America too that it's just like naturally in there, but it's just interesting to think about because it doesn't have to be that way because the relationship between the gods in and Exandria itself is very different than the Christian gods relationship to the world and that understanding.
Yeah, religion in this campaign is fascinating.
Yeah.
How they interact with the gods, how they interact with even institutional religion. Like, it kind of surprises me how resistant most of the group is to the religious influences that exist in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're very suspicious of the Order of the Platinum Dragon.
Yeah.
They're very suspicious of even like Kima,
Yeah.
like just being a paladin of the Platinum Dragon is highly
Mm-hmm.
suspicious to them. And even the way that Pike interacts with her relationship with Saren Ray is
Yeah.
really interesting as well, because it seems a lot more casual
Yeah.
than you would expect from a cleric. And I think that comes from Ashley being really new to D&D and like not
Mm-hmm.
having a lot of experience. Like I think this was the first time of her playing D&D in this group. And also because she's absent for so much of this campaign, she never really gets the chance to like deepen her religious relationships with her God.
Yeah.
And so she's kind of just treated as a more or less like a paladin. She's not really a cleric at the
Yeah.
day in the way that she uses her abilities.
Mm-hmm.
She's much more warrior focused than you would expect from a cleric of Sarenrae.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that was just something that stood out to me as like very interesting. And I think like in more recent stuff, they've sort of like deepened that
Yeah,
relationship and
totally.
taken it beyond like the real world influences and like
Mhm,
actually put more thought into like the implications of like the
mhm.
way everything works with the calamity and everything like that onto how that would reflect into the world. And but it's so it's like interesting to see, especially because it's always interesting coming into it with the perspective that I had of having watched all of campaign 2 first before I
Yeah.
started campaign 1, because I see like sort of like where they've gone, and I got to see like after they had sorted everything out.
Mhm.
And like I know I've talked about this before, but like it's interesting to like go back and like see those more like jolty moments. Like that's not the word I'm looking for, but
There's
like
rough edges.
there's rough edges,
It's
exactly.
not polished by any means.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to see that and
Mhm.
like think about it and think about like the changes they must have made to take it to where it is now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much going on in this first half of the episode. Like, you think that it's all discussion, like all boring stuff, like they're just going from one person to another. But what Matt is like expertly weaving in all of these different plot threads, all of these different
Mhm.
lore drops, all of these different conflicts. Like, his I mean, he's almost nurturing this religious thing that we're talking about
Yeah.
as well. Like, I was actually really interested watching him try to explain to the group as Kima, like, the purpose of the gods. Like,
Yeah.
he's put into a position to, like, regardless of his own personal opinions on the subject, he has to step into these highly religious, highly devout
Mhm.
characters and present the pantheon, like devoutness, to a group of skeptics.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's just fascinating how many different lines are just being woven into this episode, and it's there's a lot going on, and it's really hard to pick out each individual thread that's going
Yeah.
on here.
Yeah, and another thing I'd want to point out before we wrap up the discussion on the gods is just the like the interesting thing to me was that like Vax's interest in the gods, like knowing where
Yeah,
his story
yeah,
goes and knowing that obviously at this point,
yeah.
like that's not at all something that is planned for him, because that whole thing happens on like a spur of the moment
The
thing, a
knee-jerk
moment of
reaction.
crisis.
Yeah,
And it's like, but right now it feels like it's like laying the groundwork for Vax's story arc, but it's all like coincidental. And
it's
like,
so coincidental.
and I love that about D&D, and like it's great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that's what makes Critical Role so engaging, because it is 100% improv. It's
Mhm.
100% just in real-time reactions of these players, these characters going through this world that the DM has created. But
Yeah.
there's also foreshadowing going on, and not
Hmm.
necessarily foreshadowing from the DM, who has like intentionally put foreshadowing into the narrative, which
Hmm.
we also see in this episode, but we're also having the characters themselves produce their own foreshadowing without even knowing it unconsciously.
Yeah. And like it's just I think that's just like one of the things that is the magic of storytelling.
Yeah,
Is like the way that when people are skilled at storytelling, even if they don't know where the story is going,
totally.
even if they have no control over where the story is going, there are still these threads that can be woven together. Because I bet there are a billion other conversations that these characters have had with NPCs or whatever that just are like ordinary conversations, but that would have been made significant if their story had gone a different way. And it's just like the way that our brains can pick out these things, the way that already, like, the fact that like Vax has an interest in how the gods work, like it's laying the groundwork for to be built upon when the right opportunities arise. And it's just, it's fascinating.
It is. And I love that you brought up the brain part of it as well, because it's what our brains do. Our brains create meaning out of meaningless things.
Exactly. Like that's the whole point of being human, is finding meaning and creating meaning for ourselves.
Yeah, and so we take all of these experiences from our past, from things that we've experienced, from situations that we found ourselves in. And even though they had no meaning at that point in time, maybe 10 years later they do.
Exactly.
And that's the fascinating thing about being human, is that we can retroactively create meaning. Not just meaning in the moment, being like, all right, I got in a car crash. What does that mean for me? But like looking back and be like, I got in a car crash 10 years ago. At the time, it didn't mean anything. But now it means that, you know, I know how to thrive in adversity or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just one of the examples about how like D&D truly is like a microcosm of life in so many ways. And it's just really cool and really fascinating. And I could wax poetic about this for literal hours, maybe even days.
I mean, that's what this podcast is for.
Exactly.
Well, that brings to personal experiences, like what's coming up for us as we're absorbing this.
Yeah, well, it just kind of makes me think about like my past relationship to faith. Because like I used to have a very strong relationship to faith before I began to like question things about like the institution of the church. And it just like makes me wonder sometimes, like, because that was something that was very, very important to me, but it is also something that has like, due to like the institutionalization and the way that like certain people are in the world, like basically been ruined for me. And it's just like that, and it's just something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, because it was something that was really important to me, but there's all of these like bad things mixed up with it too, and a lot of things that I don't want to be attached to or associated with. And it just brings up the question of like, just like, I mean, I don't even know whether I want to ever have that in the same way again, but it just sort of like just brings up those questions about like spirituality and gods and all of these things. And in my own personal life, I don't have answers now. This is a very long thing. It's a very complicated subject. It's only been like within the past few years that like my entire perspective on everything has been like shifted entirely. And it's just, I don't know, it's interesting to see these examples in D&D and how things are approached in media, like separate from like the Christian God. And it just sort of feeds into, I guess, those like questions and that journey for me.
Well, I think that the fantasy genre in general, is often a gateway drug to people questioning their religious preconceptions.
Yeah.
Because more often than not, fantasy genres have pantheons. It's not like
Oh
one
yeah.
god, not like it's not the Judeo-Christian theology that we're used to in our Western society in North America primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does open up the door to interact with religious concepts in a way that isn't necessarily institutionalized
Yeah.
in our as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, for me, the personal experiences that are coming up for me is like I'm writing novels, I'm writing fantasy novels at the moment. And so when we're talking about like these things that drop in that mean nothing when you first write them, and then like you're done with the book and you loop it back around to the thing that dropped in, like that's not intentional sometimes.
Yeah.
Like you just write and you have these things that drop in or download or like even experiences that change what comes next. And that's why I don't really like plotting things out specifically and creating
Mm-hmm.
outlines for the books that I write, because I know the plot points that I want to, like the general arc of where I want to end up and like the general evolution of the narrative. But I don't want to constrain myself with specifics
Yeah.
before the specifics create themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just fascinating like how much I've learned from D&D in my fantasy writing. Like just learning from Matt how he builds fantasy worlds, how he built Exandria, and how he balances combats and mechanics and like all of this stuff that Matt does as a DM has really, really, really influenced the way that I write as a result. And it has more of a D&D feel in the finished product than I would say other versions of fantasy do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, he has like the time for it. When you think about like how many hours of content there is in like Critical Role in comparison to like TV shows or like books, like there's just that time to expand the world to that degree. Like there's only so many words or like so much screen time that can be filled in those other mediums, but because it's like an independent thing and because like D&D is so long form, it really gives you the time to like breathe life into the world and into the NPCs and like make it like an actual functional place. Like there's all this discussion all the time about like plot holes and stuff like that, but oftentimes in those shorter form things they're necessary. There needs to be those moments where like the audience needs to suspend their disbelief because there just isn't time to explain absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But with like a Critical Role and like other long form like D&D actual play stuff like that, there is the time for it. And like even with things that don't get explored in this campaign, there's other campaigns, and now like they're bringing in other DMs with Exandria Unlimited. Like this is an openly expanding world, and like I just think that's really cool to see. I mean, it's one of the reasons, to go like a little bit off topic for a moment, that one of my other favorite D&D shows, Unprepared Casters, is so interesting because they sort of started with this concept, because the concept for that podcast is you kind of they started with like a single arc and they do all of these short little arcs, but they each are like jumping off and expanding different parts of the world. So we started with like one arc, and then the second arc was a spin-off of that arc. And at first it was like a spin-off of the previous arc, but now that they have like the framework for a world, they're just like jumping around to wherever interests them and does these like short little arcs. It's interesting the way that their world and like the stories and the plot lines and the arcs have been like woven together through this jumping around and like filling in the holes or like jumping out to a whole new area that has not been explored or even brought up before and seeing how it starts to bring everything together. It's like seeing that magic in the works already.
And saying magic, I also want to bring in magic mechanics to this as well.
Yeah.
Because when we're talking about the fantasy genre, we often see exaggerated magic mechanics. Like,
Yeah.
if you have magic in this world that you're building, who's to say that one person's magic ability is limitless?
Yeah.
Like, who's to say that with my magical ability, I could just like close my eyes and the world would be destroyed?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, we have to have some type of parameters built into this to make it interesting, to drive the narrative forward, to provide challenges for the characters, to provide triumphs for the characters. And D&D has been really instrumental in me being understanding, like, all right, so someone's magic that they can use within a day isn't limitless. Like, they are going to tire, they are going to get exhausted. And so that actually makes it more realistic too.
Yeah,
So the
absolutely.
suspension of disbelief isn't necessarily necessary if you can build in these more realistic parameters that are easily comparable to our real life experiences.
Exactly.
Well, what are we going to do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like we covered a huge range of topics. I think this is just, I mean, back to what I was talking about earlier. I think this is just like inviting me to like expand my journey into like rediscovering like spirituality and not shying away from it. But maybe if that was something that was important to me in the past, there are elements that could be important to me now. That could be like without the bad aspects. And maybe it doesn't look the same. Maybe it looks completely different. Maybe it wears a whole different skin, but just kind of like giving myself permission to like re-examine that.
Yeah, I love to ask the question, like, can you be religious outside of an institution? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But you have to build that for yourself.
Exactly.
And I've done that a lot lately, of being like, all right, how do I want to express my own relationship to religion and spirituality in a way that feels authentic to me? And it's a huge practice. Like,
yeah,
you know, you go one step in one direction, that doesn't work, you go two steps in another direction, that doesn't work, and it's a constant process.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, I guess for things that I want to do is like keep having these conversations, I think, because there's a lot of assumptions that are going on in this episode.
Oh yeah.
Like, me and Alyssa talked about this last time, is that the huge amount of bias that we're seeing right now from each of the characters and how that's being displayed. And like, I think there's a lot of biases and assumptions that are happening here. And whether it's the characters' assumptions or the players' assumptions, I don't think that really makes a difference at the end of the day, because they are still behaving in the ways that they're behaving regardless of where the assumptions are coming from.
Exactly.
I think it's just important to have these conversations where we question those assumptions that flavor everything that we say, everything that we do, everything that we believe, and everything that we behave as. Because like you said, it brings up these very valid questions.
Yeah.
Like, what is religion in my mind? What is spirituality in my mind? Even like the awkward shipping stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah.
Like Kima Grog, Kima Alora, even Tiberius and Alora. Like, there's a lot of assumptions that are
there's a lot of assumptions for sure. And I commend Matt for this early on challenging those assumptions of being like, you guys actually can't just like go and romance whoever you want. These are people too. They're not gonna like bend to your will. These people are not interested in you in that way. Their interests lie elsewhere. And like also challenging that like heteronormative assumption by being like, actually, these two are gay.
Yeah, yeah. And they clearly have a long history between them
Yeah.
too, that pre-existed way before Vox Machina even came into the picture.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think we just need to, I don't know, I kind of like the approach that Vax is taking to all of this. And I think that's why his art does end up being so interesting in the long term, is
Mm-hmm.
because out of the group, he seems most willing to change his viewpoint.
Yeah, because he's not going into that conversation with Kima with like an assumption already made. He is genuinely asking out of curiosity and out of a desire to like discover and learn and see if this is an area where there might be answers for the things he's looking for. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like other characters who may approach this topic with like their judgments and opinions already set in stone and just want to be right rather than like actually listening what
Mm-hmm.
others might have to say.
Yeah, and I think we can use Vax as a role model in this
Yeah,
as we're having these conversations.
absolutely.
Well, anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I think I better stop here because if I try to say something else, I'm just gonna keep talking way beyond the time that we have.
uh, the one note I want to add in before we wrap up is Percy saying, "Oh, stop that," to Vex, who was winking at the fanboying council member. And I don't think that was a very obvious thing, but I caught it.
Incredible.
And we're talking about all kinds of foreshadowing right now.
Yep,
And I think that that's a perfect example.
absolutely.
I mean, I'm a Persalia shipper at the end of the day, and
As you should be.
I mean, all reasonable people are. But that's just the note that I want to add in there for prosperity's sake, posterity's sake. All right, so we were talking about really powerful themes beyond the shipping nonsense that we get into here. And audience, we definitely encourage you to share your own insights, stories, and feelings with us as well. We'd love to know how Critical Role has impacted you in your own lives. Obviously, we've both been heavily impacted by it, and it continues to develop as time goes on in very interesting ways. So special thanks to Petall for joining me on this episode. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to discussing the second half of this episode.
Yeah, we'll be discussing campaign 1, episode 14, part 2, which will be a lot of shopping going on. And joining me again will be Petall. And as always, I'm looking for more co-hosts and guests. So if you're interested in coming on, just hit me up. I'll send you the link. And in the meantime, please comment, like, subscribe below, follow us on Tumblr at Sacred Reading CR. And until next time, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be free, and always, always, always remember to love each other. Take care, guys.